Hello and welcome to the Jackcast, your Swansea City podcast. I'm Matt Barocco and I'm joined as ever by Steve Carroll. Evening, Steve.
Evening.
Well, probably a little bit of a warning here. Not going to be the most positive podcast we've ever done. There's been a couple of stinkers in the past. This will certainly rival some of them. It's just me and Steve tonight, back to the two of us. So we'll have a bit of a chat over what we've witnessed since we last spoke, and that gives us 4 games to discuss, Steve. First of all, starting back with an away trip to Bramall Lane. It seems like a lifetime ago, and what will turn out to be something of a familiar theme was a pretty miserable afternoon for the Swans.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't a terrible start, to be honest. I thought we didn't play too badly in the first 20 minutes. I had a couple of chances, but as what happens far too often is that the opposition seem to score from their first opportunity at goal. And you know when you're facing a side that's towards the top of the league that it's going to be very difficult then, isn't it? So obviously we found ourselves 2 down then by the break, and you're not coming back from that. But I think what massively rubbed the salt into the wound was that third goal, wasn't it? Which was, in a season of awful defending and bad goals given away, it probably rivaled any of them, didn't it?
Oh, it was horrendous. I mean, you just look at the build-up play, the fact that it was a 60-40 in Norton's favour, and he I don't know, he's trying to dink it or just clear. He's not trying to clear the ball. He's trying to be fancy with it. The boys ploughed through him. He's come into the box then. There's a whole mess in our back line. Shock horror. It's not like it's the first time we've mentioned that this season. Fishers end up taking out Cabango. So there's 2 of our players out of the play, and the ball comes across. And would you guess a former Swan, Ollie McBurney, to tap it in for 3? Steve, I think that goal might epitomise not only this season for the Swans, but the frailties in Russell Martin's whole reign since he's been the Swansea boss.
Yeah, it probably does, doesn't it? I mean, like I say, Norton, cowardly thing, really. He's not played since, has he? Which is a little bit tempting, I suppose. Like I say, Fisher, just the general bizarre decisions he makes, or inability to make the do what's needed. And then it just leads to a tap-in, doesn't it? I mean, some of the goals we're going to end up discussing here. I mean, we're talking the type of scenes you see at Middlesbrough, except for at Middlesbrough, there would be people going bonkers at you because it is that bad. So. I suppose the only thing I would say about that third goal is at least it didn't cost us because we were already done. But I mean, it's just shameful to see some of the decisions that are being made. They should be deeply embarrassed by the goals that we're conceding, because we're talking about professional football here, and not just professional football. We're talking about second tier football, and I cannot believe the amount of bad goals that we seem to be giving away. It's just, like I say, it's just shameful, isn't it?
The thing is, I think it was after this game that Russell Martin was talking about the embarrassment of riches that Sheffield United have. We'd like to have players of their quality, and it would be a different story if we had their players, which I cannot help but think at this point is excuses, because I think, and there'll be some who listen who agree and some who disagree, but I think the squad of players, although we have got a very small squad, and yes, as Russell Martin continues to remind us, it is a very young squad, but it's better than the way it's doing. And Roy Keane said on Sky a few years ago, he said, "You were losing a game. Where's your pride? Where's your anger? Why you're losing a game. I know we didn't expect to go to Sheffield United and win, but you want to," I know he worded it as, "you want to start kicking people, make yourself feel a bit better," I think the quote was. But you want to see that it affects the players, that they want to do it. It is all too nice. We're so easy to play against. We roll over and have our belly tickled, don't we, Steve, too often. And you hear then after the game, I'm proud of the way they played, and they showed great character, and they'll learn to get better. But, and we'll talk about this as we analyse the other games, Steve, but there's been no sense of progression there. I feel like these players aren't getting better, and we've been told that they are, but I mean, the proof is in the pudding on a Saturday afternoon.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to really think that maybe we're getting worse, not better. That's the underlying truth of it. I mean, I felt at the beginning of Martin's reign, obviously we did start slow, but we weren't conceding too many goals. And then, we started to improve after about a dozen or so games and stuff like that. But since then, I mean, there hasn't been a great deal of consistency, and I don't feel we're getting better at all. I mean, you surely can't think the same thing, because we are. I know we'll go on to talk about it, but I mean, just the goals conceded thing. It's just, how can you think that that's remotely acceptable? It's quite shambolic. So it's got to pick up, isn't it? You can't be using these excuses. Yes, you would expect to go to Sheffield United and lose in general. They've got far better players than what we have. They've got a bigger budget, but surely you expect to at least make them work for goals. You certainly don't expect to give away a goal like that third one, do you? I mean, it's, like I say, I think I'll put it to you like this. I watched them play Wrexham a few days before we played them.
Yeah.
And I thought when I was watching it that Wrexham were giving them a better game than what we were going to give them. And I wasn't wrong, unfortunately.
No, you're spot on. I had exactly the same thought. And it was just, it was the hunger. This is the saddest thing. And this is the part that really irks me at the moment with the Swans. It was the hunger, because I remember we were talking about this. We've spoken about it a lot, about the games around about the turn of the year that we looked at with optimism, especially when we were looking ahead to the January transfer window and how we can improve. We looked at the likes of beating Watford 4-0 down here, really pushing Burnley. And I know we lost that game, but I think there was so many positives come out of that, particularly in the first half. And what I talked about previously on this was the aggression and the hunger, the desire. Joe Allen in particular in those two games was an absolute beast, but he epitomised he led and others followed in that kind of aggression, in that kind of snapping into tackles and making sure they didn't get a second on the ball, much like, as we'll talk about later, what Stoke were pressing high and hard on us last night, and that's how we were playing. And I thought, if we keep this up, and I remember thinking this at the time against Burnley, I think I might have mentioned it to you, if we keep playing with this intensity, because that's what it is, it was an intensity, then we'll do well. And do you know what? At that point, I thought there's every chance that we could sneak into the playoffs. It was based on, and we talk about the process and how Russell Martin is a young manager and he's learning, but he's had these little glimpses of inspiration in his 18 months here. And I think the most frustrating part, Steve, is he hasn't capitalised or learnt from them. And I think we can talk about when Stephen Bender came in after the Stoke 1-1 draw away. He came into the team, and for a few games we started to be a little bit more no-nonsense at the back, and then we went on a winning run of 7 of 9. Although a couple of those games were fortuitous, we did go on that winning run. And we'll talk about that aggression, and there was little shoots of optimism through the season, and then it just goes back to the old way, and the old way has been proven not to work.
Yeah, it does a bit, doesn't it? I mean, I suppose the one good thing is we did see the back of that goal kick routine, didn't we, for example? But, we're making just so many mistakes, aren't we? I mean, I'm sure Fisher's going to get mentioned a lot, but since he's come into the team, we have conceded so many goals, haven't we? I mean, it's pretty obvious that we don't want him in the team, but, I know we've made a signing, and we Sondergaard, very, very inexperienced, really. I mean, it's unlikely to think he's going to play much, but, does anyone have any faith in this goalkeeper? I think in the recent fanzine I just brought out, I referred to him as the goalkeeper that can't save shots and can't catch crosses. I mean, and it does feel like that, really, doesn't it? I mean, if you can't do those things, you're going to concede constantly, and it feels like that's what we're doing. So, it is concerning at the moment, isn't it?
It's hugely concerning, and I think it's probably a combination of him being pound for pound the worst goalkeeper we've had this century. And when I say that, I mean when you consider the money we paid for him, the level he's playing at, everything, all things considered, he's not a freebie young Welsh League footballer that has got a game. He's not, we're not talking about, your Jason Joneses and stuff like that, or your Matthew Greggs or anything, and you're thinking, right, okay, they're young. This guy has come in for money to be our number one goalkeeper. And so I think it's probably the worst goalkeeper we've had as a club since the turn of the century. And I think I think the defenders feel that way as well. I do feel like there's so much shakier, and they've been terrible all season anyway, but there is a sense of nervousness with Fisher there, and we seem to be making so many more mistakes at the back. And the goals we conceded go from from ridiculous to embarrassing. And we'll talk about the sole win in these 4 games, Steve. We brought Blackpool down to the Swancombe, and an interesting stat that has come out in the last couple of days, that we've only actually ended up winning 4 out of the last 20 games, 3 of which came against 10 men. And this was another one where we needed 10 men just to scrape by relegation-threatened Blackpool. It's the first time in 28 years or so, going down to watch the Swans, or 27, 28 years, that I've seen the Swans crowd vocally boo, and loudly, the Swans win. And I think that's the first time I can remember it happening. It was a real eye-opener, and just really told me a lot about how they felt that game went.
Yeah, it did really, didn't it? I mean, we'll get on to discussing what, in terms of booing, I think, a little bit later. But, I mean, rightly or wrongly, it's incredibly damning, isn't it, to hear that from the crowd. And there were quite a few people who were really frustrated, really, with it. But, I mean, look, we weren't great. I mean, you infamously, I remember with the first goal, we were like, what are we doing? Because Sorinola played a strange pass across the man in, didn't he?
Yeah.
Back, and then Sorinola's taking a swing, and then it's gone in, and it looks like a really good goal then. To be fair, the move initially for it was quite good. And I mean, we did seem okay at that point, and obviously then the red card comes. I suppose it's the one thing I will say is the other 2 games that we've won with 10 men, I think it was 0-0 with the red card, so at least for this one we were winning. But again, we've given the ball away.
Then we conceded.
Yeah, we've given the ball away in a cheap area, and it led to, an equaliser. At this point, you're thinking, good grief. I mean, because I thought Blackpool were horrendous, if I'm honest. They look doomed to relegation. Like, it'd be a big shock for me if they stayed up, which is quite devastating, because obviously Blackpool is the greatest away day of the season. But to be fair, Sorinola again was the difference by throwing a great ball in, and it's led to an own goal. But I mean, even then, there was still time for Blackpool to hit the post, wasn't there? So, look, it's a bit concerning like that we did really scrape by against what was an awful team that I'd like to think we should have won quite comfortably against, especially considering they had 10 men. So, I was frustrated after it, but nevertheless relieved that we managed to get that win over the line. I mean, because if you look at that now, in terms of if we had drop points, then that buffer towards the bottom 3 isn't so good, is it? I think we've got 11 points right now, haven't we? And it would be 8 with it, I think, or maybe even 7, because obviously Blackpool would have that extra point that would drag them closer to us. But it would, I'm not too concerned about relegation at this stage. It would take a big collapse, I would have thought. But at the same time, I mean, if we carry on conceding like we are, maybe we will be in it. But, at least with that, we did get that win, and it may not have led to much else, but it's 3 points on the board, isn't it? It
shows, it shines a light on our problem areas, which is, as we keep talking about, conceding late. And it is just when the opposition decide to up the ante and stuff, and Blackpool probably deserved something out of the game. When you look at the last ditch Joe Allen tackle in the box, and the fact they hit the post and stuff, and you're thinking, okay, this is we're hanging on against this team here, and they're terrible, and we're a team that prides ourselves on possession and dominating the ball, and yet as soon as the opposition show a little bit of their teeth, a little bit of their hunger, we're terrified of the ball all of a sudden. We can't keep it, and that's no good, because it's not good just having the ball and being good with the ball when the opposition allow you to. I mean, we can talk about the squad being young, Steve, but this isn't a developmental thing. This isn't something we've seen. Remember, we were talking last year about maybe that October run where we looked really, really good. And Pato and Perot had synced up their partnership and stuff, and you were thinking, here we go. We did talk then, maybe we've come a little bit early in terms of our run, because afterwards, when the tail-off happened, we were thinking we were regressing. But in reality, what we wanted to see was us start off like a team that couldn't play football, and then slowly we wanted to see the building blocks of Russell Martin's work come in, and us not necessarily just pick up results, but start to see the performances be more fluid and more coherent. And it's not been that way. And again, this dynamic that we've got in the team of passing it and showing for the ball, there's 3 or 4 players in that team, Steve, I think really are uneasy with the ball. And they're playing in the back line, which is why we gift away one-on-ones every game.
Yeah, it feels like that, doesn't it? I mean, the crowd are very nervous now, aren't they, with certain players with the ball. I mean, Cabango, I think especially, is one that seems out of form. And I think the reason I'm going to mention him first is because, how can I put this? I think it seems like Wood and Darling swap quite a lot there. If there's a change in the back line, it's one or the other of them that they swap with each other. Someone goes on the bench and one starts. But it feels like Cabango is in the team every week, but he's really not playing particularly well. So I don't really understand why he isn't being punished either, if you know what I mean. It's a bit of a strange one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. He does seem like there's a couple of players in that team who are undroppable. Grimes will play every minute, although there will be few arguments about that. But Perot seems to play every minute of every game, and he's had most of his games been
you say this, you are right in general, but the one time he did get subbed was the time when he should not have been subbed. But so that makes it even more bizarre. I mean, he should not have come off against Birmingham. Yet every other game where, let's be honest, in general, he looks a bit half-hearted and isn't offering a lot, yet he's on there 90 minutes. Like that, again, is just, who is seeing that? It's just bizarre.
It's poor management. I mean, you stick the knife in at all, but in terms of that decision and the decisions in general, we talk about Birmingham taking him off and bringing Darling on, and just thinking you're just inviting pressure on you. And obviously we end up going down to 10 men. It was a clusterfuck, but that game, he was on a hat-trick, and subbing him off, when you wouldn't sub him off every game, he looked like he could not be fucked to be there. But the one time he looked like he had a bit of hunger, the bit between his teeth, and he's bringing him off. And as you say, who's seeing that? Who's making that call? And you think every other time you're thinking, take him off, because we're practically playing with 10, and yet he plays 95 minutes. And the one time you're thinking, he's going to grab a hat-trick today, and he's hooked. So, yeah, there's been a lot of questionable decisions by Russell Martin, and particularly in recent weeks. And this was off the tail of the Blackpool game. Steve, Russell Martin, I think he said that the crowd got nervous and that fed into the players. I don't like that. I don't like pointing the finger at the crowd. I mean, he keeps referring to the fact that the team are so young, but they are professional footballers playing in the second tier of the English game, and I don't think that's good enough. If we're going to talk about this is the squad we've got and stuff like that, and he needs to, if you need to get a psychologist in or whatever like that, hopefully he does a better job than our set piece coach does, the bloody set pieces. But there's something not right to me about a manager pointing to the crowd as to why we were the way we were. And I feel like the crowd often feed off the performance. It kind of is a bit one way or the other, Steve, isn't it? But I don't like it when managers start making excuses for things when he could just put his hands up and go, the last 15 minutes of that Blackpool game weren't acceptable. We shouldn't have been struggling against a team who were down the bottom, who were pretty hopeless for the first 75 minutes, and they couldn't get it sniff, and they're down to 10 men.
Well, the thing is now, the line about, it's a young team and everything, it seems to be getting trotted out a lot, and I think what's frustrating is that wasn't happening so much earlier in the season. Now, I know one or two players have gone, but I mean, Obafemi was quite young. Patterson maybe not so, but he really hasn't played that much since about the opening month of the season, so it's not really washing, is it? It just seems like that is now the default excuse. And yeah, obviously we are an inexperienced team, but at the same time, I mean, a lot of the players that are playing now were signed by this manager. And I mean, look, there is Norton. I know, obviously, we've just criticised him with Sheffield United, but I mean, he has been frozen out completely, more or less, the last few months, hasn't he? So maybe he should have been in the team a little bit earlier, or certainly maybe been involved a bit more. But you can't just keep using this, young, inexperienced team line all the time. I mean, the fact is a lot of them are reasonably experienced now, so maybe even not at this club, but a lot how many of them have, played, hardly any football? I mean, someone like Darlin, maybe he's inexperienced at this level, but at the same time, he played for a season and a half at MK Dons and was at Cambridge before that. I mean, he must have made well over 100 league appearances. I mean, someone like Lata Bodier, I know he didn't play last night, for example, but I mean, he must have played over 100 times just now, because obviously he gets picked nearly every game. Wood, maybe less so, obviously. But I mean, Cabango has easily played over 100 games, hasn't he? I mean, you look at the midfield, and you've got Joe Allen, Matt Grimes, Jay Fulton. Fulton and all those three have probably played 200 games for the Swans. And I mean, Joe Allen has played God knows how many games in his career. So, not quite washing massively with me, that one. It seems like too much of an excuse. Yes, you will get some mistakes, but there's too many for it to be the main thing. And like I say, I mean, that's the thing with the crowd. I mean, yeah, the crowd are a bit nervous because of mistakes. So maybe that doesn't help. But, I mean, look, people are frustrated because they can see no progress. And I think a lot of it is, like, as much as we do want to see good football and everything like that, but I think we've said all season, and we seem to play too much football in our own half where we're taking needless risks. Yet in the opposition half, not so much. And I think that's what's frustrating, because when we were successful rising up through the divisions, we didn't seem to take as many risks in our own half. I mean, I know we had the likes of Doris, the recent goal, for example, but I never felt like he was getting ridiculously involved in a build-up like this manager wants the goalkeeper too. So I think sometimes we just got to learn that, haven't we? I think we've said it numerous times as well, haven't we?
Yeah, we keep getting told by certain people and certain fans that this is total football and this is the Swansea way, but it's certainly not the way I remember Rodgers, Martinez, Potter or Laudrup playing, and that's what I consider to be, over the last generation, the Swansea way. I mean, it's certainly the most successful era in my lifetime. And when you look at how we set up in those teams, we had defenders that first and foremost could defend. You had Gary Monk there for a large period of our rise. Excuse me. Ashley Williams, fantastic on the ball, but first and foremost, a bully of a defender. You're not getting around him. He'll wrestle you to the floor. It doesn't matter. He's going to win that ball in the box. He's going to do whatever it takes. And the naivety of this team to allow the opposition, and you mentioned again about the youth of the team and stuff, and maybe excuse him for the mistakes, but look, Ryan Manning isn't young. I know he's been one of our best players this season, but he's got, the last couple of games, we've noticed him as a culpable for quite a few goals. And I'm thinking, so we're going to say now that it's his youth that's going to cost the goals there? I don't think it is. I think it's the system that is costing the goals more than the age of these players. The system that means that we're telling Cabango and Darlin and Wood to try and play these balls across the back to each other when they're not comfortable doing so, and they get stretched because Manning and Latabodiere or Sorinola, whoever it may be, are so high up the pitch that they're pulled out wide. And this is Russell Martin's way of playing. And I think we can go so far and say they are young and inexperienced, but the sort of players you need, and it's not the first time I've said this, Steve, the sort of players you need to see this work is something that we could only dream of with our current financial budget. I was actually on. There was maybe a couple of the guys who were on it will listen to this podcast, but there was a Twitter Spaces after the game last night, which I listened to for 15-20 minutes, and one of the guys contributing to that, and there was a lot of good stuff on there. There was a lot of good analytical pieces on there, and one of the guys said on there he referred to Russell Martin as a checkbook manager without a checkbook, but he meant it in a complimentary way, and I thought, well, how can that be a compliment? I'm not disrespecting the guy who said it, but I thought, if he's a checkbook manager without a checkbook, that's not something anyone. I mean, you look at Scott Parker, for example. I don't rate Scott Parker as a manager. He's got 2 promotions from this league, both with the highest budget teams and the best players. It's easy to do it if you've got the best players. I'd expect, people keep telling us Russell Martin will succeed if he goes to a club that backs him or has better players. I suppose so. He probably will. But that's the challenge of being here. Our best managers have always had the whole performing better than the sum of its parts. And they've always overachieved. And I know it's a massive ask, but that was the Swansea way. It was finding a way. We had to outthink teams. We had to be better tactically because man for man, we couldn't go out and splurge 2 million on this player and 3.5 million on the best striker in the league and stuff like that when we were in the lower divisions. Like other clubs, could go and spend silly money. We had to go and say, well, actually, how are we going to beat these with less valuable players? And Russell Martin, if he needs money to make it work, that is a little bit of a damning indictment of the system. He's not making the players better. The players have to be better for the system to work.
Well, yeah, exactly. And as you say, I mean, we did seem to have managers that would make a team greater than the sum of its parts. And, it's quite clear that this manager isn't able to do that, is he? Where, we all know that the manager has been let down to a point by the board. I mean, the fact that the squad is weaker now than it was, before the transfer window opened is quite damning, isn't it? But, I mean, again, I keep going back to it. You can't justify that for the lack of, reasonable even defending from us. I think that's what the issue is, isn't it? I don't think we're expecting world beaters. Nobody surely expected playoffs, did they, after what had happened in January? But I mean, I did expect us to not, to be improving. I think that's the thing. Certainly, or improving with what we've got. Maybe the fact that we haven't got pace, I think we said all season. I mean, that clearly is holding us back, isn't it? But yeah, I looked at the team that started last night's game and we got onto it, and I thought, well, it's not a bad team. There's goals in the team. And he's put in the 3 centre backs, and it's a team that should work reasonably well with what we've got because there aren't many other options. But I mean, but you come and you look at the team that played at Blackburn, for example, and I'm thinking to myself, Cundle has come in for Cooper, who's on the bench. Whittaker hasn't started. We're playing with wing backs. Sorinola, I know maybe he was a bit shattered after the Blackpool game, but he didn't start. Latibaudiere comes back in. We're playing Allen, Fulton, and Grimes. I mean, where on earth were the goals coming from? Honestly, where were they? Because that was my first thought. It's like, how is this team going to score? Because I don't see goals in it. I mean, Perot obviously is that he's got a reasonable total. He probably should have more, as we've said. But the rest of them, I mean, Fulton can chip in with the odd one, but we just looked at it and thought, well, how are we going to score here? And
you were proven right. But that game, if we go on to it, was an example of Swansea having large periods of possession, territory, that we looked better than them for large periods of the game. They didn't score.
Yeah, I mean, we had that one, there was a header in the first half and the free kick that's at the bar, but there weren't many other chances, were there? I mean, and let's be honest, first half, like I say, we had a lot of the ball and then we didn't make the most of it. Second half, we were quite poor, weren't we? And then, again, as usual, when it looked like we were going to have a nice, rare, clean sheet, a decent point, Perot switches off from the corner and, free header, goal. And, it's basic stuff again, isn't it? I mean, surely when you learn to play football at a young age, if you're marking people on set pieces, you just got to go with the runner. I mean, he probably couldn't believe it. In the last minute, free header to win the game. I mean, it's laughable, really, isn't it?
It's really laughable. You talk about Perot and this general issue I've got, and we can talk about the youth and the inexperience of the team, but one thing you can't forgive, and one thing I always expect from my team is effort and hunger. I don't expect us to win every game, but I expect us to leave it out there, And if you're going to lose a game because the referee had a shocker, lose a game because the other team were just better than you. Don't lose a game because you've stopped marking your man. Or yesterday, we'll come on to the Stoke game in a little bit, but yesterday there was a ball in the air. It must have been 7 yards out. And Perot was there. It's his first half. And Perot was underneath it. And he didn't jump to challenge. And it was a header that would have been right in front of goal, would have challenged, tested the goalkeeper. And he didn't challenge. And I thought, where's the hunger? Where's the desire? You can be as technical as you want, but if you don't want it as much as the opposition, and I keep coming back to the Watford game and the Burnley game, where we had that intensity and the hunger. And I see so often, look at the goal, the goals that we've conceded. It is quite often that we're switching off, or we're standing still and waiting for something to happen, and we're not reacting quickly enough. It's poor. It's so poor. And I don't understand do we need a psychologist in the club? The system, we know it hasn't worked to this point. It hasn't given us the consistency we need to be serious challengers at the top end of the table. we can talk about the transfer windows. We have talked about on previous podcasts, and we will continue to criticise the ownership group until they leave because of what mess they've left us in. But it's not 100% fixable by changing the owners if the manager isn't learning lessons, basic lessons, and the players aren't fighting to win the game, fighting to stay in the game. The Sheffield United third goal was one of the worst goals I've seen us concede in many years. It was a shithousery goal. We didn't try. There was no fight. There was no hunger. You talk about the Blackburn goal. No fight in that. Just switch off. In 90th minute, switch off. And Stoke will come on to now. And another example of us just switching off and just not doing the basics. If we just did the basics, nothing technical, just did the basics, we'll come on to this after the talk of the games as well about where this leaves Russell Martin. But if we could just do the basics, feel like we'd be in the playoffs. And it's the basics that's letting us down.
Yeah, it is. It's a weak division, as we've said. I mean, I think the fact is the manager and the board will have to take a share of the blame for what is going on at the moment. Because like you said, we have been left short. As we know, I mean, we needed 3 players in the transfer window, didn't we? We needed a striker, a right wing back, which we needed all season. And I think when Bender got injured, we definitely needed a goalkeeper because the current one isn't good enough. So, I think if we'd done that, I still think that wouldn't be as bad defensively, but we still wouldn't be good enough. You'd still just see us conceding too many, wouldn't you? And even if we were better going forward, it wouldn't make up for it enough. So I think that's what the issue is. You could probably give this manager a reasonable budget and, I think what you have to say now is that he can't organise the defence. You can blame individual errors and everything all you want, but, they keep happening and it's not good enough. As I said, we're not eradicating them. And in the end, you have to say that maybe the manager and the coaching staff are incapable of getting us to eradicate them. So I think that's what the big issue is now. But, obviously I do sympathise with him, but it does feel like since the transfer window shut, doesn't it, that there was a lot of goodwill towards Martin and people had sympathy, but I think the sympathy has run dry, doesn't it?
I think it has, and we've seen that in the recent crowds and performances. There was a question after last night's game about the players not believing or not being as confident in the process. Russell Martin reacted quite angrily towards it, if I'm honest. If you haven't seen the press conference, about 10 minutes into last night's post-match conference, but it started so well against Stoke. If anyone wanted to come and prove a point and say, look, I'm good enough, it's Morgan Whittaker, and he's come in to this team. He's got his start, and within 90 seconds, he's put us 1-0 up with a fine finish, Steve. And you're thinking, let's build on this. How foolish were we to think that?
Yeah, I know. I was quite pleased to see Whittaker in the team, as I alluded to earlier, really, because I just think he is a player that hasn't had much of a chance. And I mean, there's a lot of the other players where, I think we've made judgments on them. They're probably not going to change much because you can't see the players themselves changing. So I think Whittaker hasn't had enough game time. I mean, he's done well up to this season. That's in the league below. So the natural next step for him is to see what he can do at this level. And, it was a nice finish, wasn't it? And I thought there was a couple of nice moments from him in the first half, to be honest, where there was one where he put Perot in. And I was thinking, to be fair, he's playing well here and he deserves his place in the team. But as you say, I mean, it didn't get much better than after that, that early goal, did it? I mean, in fact, it turned quite quickly, which I think was surprising for us all, wasn't it?
And once again, and can probably count on one hand this season the amount of goals we've conceded where we weren't at least indirectly responsible for it. A lot of the time, directly. Here's another one from this corner. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible to watch that ball bounce around. And every time it bounces around, that they're going to want it more than us. And it was proven again. They wanted it more. Bang. It's in the back of the net 1-1.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is, again, it's probably in the top 5 worst we've conceded in it. You're just thinking in that situation, just get the bloody thing out. But, they should never have what seems like 3 opportunities on goal, should they?
No.
And that's what they've had, and in the end, you pay for that, don't you? It's simple. They probably couldn't believe their luck.
They couldn't, and it wouldn't happen for them with other teams. You see these teams coming down here who've won 1 in 20 games and stuff like that, and you think, oh, they're in a poor run of form. But they get the opportunities here that they wouldn't get at other clubs. They wouldn't go to other clubs and find these defenders be so giving, so passive. I look at the defenders and I think, and quite alarmingly last night after the second goal, Russell Martin was obviously feeling the heat. I can only imagine he was feeling the heat. The crowd did get a bit toxic. I won't dress that up as anything other than it was. But I look at that back line that started, Wood, Kabanko and Darling, and I think it's young and it's inexperienced. But a manager who could set up a defence would probably be licking their lips at the prospect of being able to play them three, all comfortably over 6 foot, all physically able to hold their own. And you're thinking, okay, these guys, with a bit of work on the training field, and God knows he's had long enough on the training field with them, they shouldn't be conceding. Just because you've got 3 centre-halves on the bloody pitch, you should always be in a comfortable position with the ball coming in the box. You should always be able to outnumber them and make sure you deal with it. We spent many times on this podcast, Steve, criticising and the previous manager, Steve Cooper, for the way he played and the way he had to just not play the Swansea way to grind out results. But this would have been meat and drink for him, wouldn't it? These sorts of big defenders. And we saw, he had very talented players at his disposal, but he also was able to set the side up defensively, and he was able to make sure that we had the shape to not concede. This team, how we concede so many aerial balls, and we've got a set piece coach. This should be something that is literally his job, and the corner is another example of our failings and his failings, because who's taking control in the box there, Steve? Who's demanding? If we look back over the years, we'd always have almost the strongest attacker of a header of the ball on the near post, and they win 80% of them by just being there. And then you'd have man-for-man marking, making sure you're aggressive, you don't allow the opposition to get a free header on the goal, even if you can't win it. You cause trouble, you cause grief for them. It's not that way now, is it? Everything about that first goal, as you say, was embarrassing.
Well, you almost look at it and think, well, I know we cancelled Ryan Bennett's contract, but that was something that he would have actually been good at, wasn't it?
Yeah.
If you know what I mean, he would have headed balls out like that all day long. And, obviously, whether it's the right or wrong decision, I don't know. I mean, obviously he'd gone very slow in the...
I think it was financial with him, wasn't it? I think a lot of it was his wages that we couldn't sustain.
Yeah, it could well have been, couldn't it? But, I mean... You know the point I'm trying to make, though, obviously.
Oh, yeah. I think he would make a massive improvement to them, because also he's the sort of no-nonsense player that you'd expect to deal with it. He wouldn't put up with the shit that our defenders seem to do every week. And I don't see a leader back there. I don't see someone, rallying the troops. Between the 4 of them, between that back 3, Steve, and the goalkeeper, I worry about who's the most scared. They all look petrified.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, there's no confidence there at all at the moment, is there? Because we've conceded so many, and I think that's where the booing probably doesn't help, really. I mean, you were playing Parks football, and people are on your back constantly when you're not playing well. It's not going to make you play any better, is it? So, from that point of view, it's not the wisest move. I think, even if you are frustrated. I mean, I think if you boo at half time and full time, it's not quite as bad. Well, certainly full time anyway, because. If you do it at full time, I'm not saying it necessarily is right, but at least then the game has gone, isn't it? You can't affect it, and you're just expressing your anger at what you've seen. But I mean, like I say, if you do it during the game, that never is going to help if you really think if you want things to improve. I mean, yeah, I think there's zero chance of that. I mean, from my point of view with booing, I think it should really get saved for if you think people are not trying. Give you an example, like we went to West Brom once, didn't we? Montero he wasn't trying. I'll put my house on it. I think Gomez once come on sub against Chelsea, and we needed a win to see the game out 1-0 up. I think this is when the day the takeover got announced, actually, and I remember he wasn't busting a gut and he was getting it in the neck, and I think it should really be saved for those instances, because that really is the bare minimum. If you're not giving your all, then, you deserve the abuse, because, most of us would give anything to be out there. But, so yeah, that's my thoughts on booing. I don't know what page you're on with it.
Yeah, but by definition, there's at least one player who probably would come in for stick if their category is not giving their all, because Joel Pirou, we mentioned earlier, going through the motions for much of this season, he's had it's a healthy goal return. He's in double figures. He'll end up in the mid to high teens, you should think, and it'll look very respectable. But having watched him every game this season, I see a man there who's not only a shadow of the man from last season, but also he looks largely like he was so desperate to move in the summer that he's not going to do anything until he gets this move. It doesn't feel like he wants to put himself in any sort of way of challenging. Like, if the ball comes to him, he's going to have a goal, but he's not going to compete. And that's really disappointing. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not only us, it's his career as well, which will be tainted by it potentially. So, but booing is a difficult one. I mean, I think if you're going to boo during the game, not only does it kind of snowballs then, because you very rarely get a positive reaction to booing. And particularly when the crowd have resorted to booing, it's very hard to turn that back round. So you've got a double whammy there. The players performing worse because they're booed and stuff and they feel the scrutiny, and then the booing's going to intensify and they're not going to let go. And that is a very difficult thing for a manager to work his way back from. The 15-minute halftime break is something they desperately need. But, that was, booing started after the second goal, Stephen. The second goal is another example of us switching off. I mean, we had 7 players, I think, in the box. 8, perhaps, if you count Andy Fisher. And yet, everyone just run back towards their own goal line, and nobody stopped and looked to see who the hell they were marking. It's embarrassing. He had a free shot from, 15 yards? It's schoolboy stuff. As you say, it's the sort of stuff you wouldn't expect to see at Minis Newydd. You'd expect them to be a little bit more professional and a bit more streetwise than what we're seeing from the Swansea players sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem, isn't it? We've given the ball away cheaply again, and it's ended up out wide. There's a nice cross into the box, and he's unmarked. And when you're unmarked like that, you can pick your spot, can't you? That's what he's done. And within 10 minutes of going in front, we're behind, aren't we? It just feels too basic. I mean, we never get it that easy off other teams. They're always picking us up. Or they make us work for our goals, don't they? But you get the feeling that, well, you don't get the feeling. It's more or less fact, isn't it? That the opposition are not working that hard to win, to get their goals off us. I mean, it's just way too much of a regular occurrence, isn't it? And, people have had a guts for them. That's why, rightly or wrongly, people are booing. That's because they're not seeing any progress, and they're fed up of some of the decision making that we're seeing, and the fact that it's really, a lot of it's holding us back now, isn't it? It's costing us results.
When you look at the bigger picture, I mean, we're at season ticket renewal time, and it's going to take a hit this year. Let's be honest. And look at every factor. You look at the cost of living crisis is going to impact it anyway, but you look at the discontent towards the owners and that anger. You don't want to put the money in their back pockets. But then you look at the manager as well and how he hasn't learned in 18 months to do the basics. And you think, and we had a very low crowd last night, but it was vocal at 2-1. They made themselves heard, and they were very much against what they were seeing. I mean, we're not seeing any progress. You're not seeing the players show the desire to compete in those key areas that win you games. If your striker isn't going to battle for a header at 7 yards out when the keeper is very difficult for him to get to it if you win it, there's a problem. You're not going to sneak the winning goals in those games. And if at the other end you're completely switching off every game. You mentioned Blackburn, free header last minute. This game, they had 3 stabs at the first goal, and the second goal was a free shot from 15 yards, despite us having the majority of our team in the box. It's a struggle to see how fans can be happy, and they won't be. And that crowd was worryingly low last night and will be lower, I should imagine, on Monday night against Rotherham because that's televised. So fans have got an even bigger excuse not to turn up. I'm worried about that number B, to be honest, because it's... I can't think of many people who will want to go down. The diehards and the ones that would go rain or shine, obviously. But that walk-up crowd is going to be horrific.
I've said this for a while now with walk-up, like the fact that most midweek games are on the red button, for example, or you can pay a tenner for it, obviously. And the club are charging over 30 quid to go in, especially midweek in the winter time. Who's paying that?
Yeah,
I just thought hardly any, under 100, I'd have thought. So, that maybe that's something they should look at, because the fact that you can actually watch it at the house, I've said it before, there's a game changer, really. So, you are not going to get much of a walk up for that. I wouldn't have thought, are you? So, look, I think the problem's going to come now, where like you were talking there a little bit about season tickets and stuff like that. Now, I've said I don't think the manager's job is in danger, because I think the owners will look at this as a business. And from the business point of view, we are 11 points clear of the drop. We look unlikely to go down, even though we're on a bad run, unless we end up getting significantly closer to that relegation zone. I'm talking about 5 or 6 points. I don't think the manager is in trouble. I think he will be fine. I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with that, but I don't think he's going to have a problem. But however, this is another way of looking at it. It's because they won't want to pay him up, right? But we don't know what the early bird for season tickets is closed, right? Now, we don't know how many people have renewed at this point. So but we're on this bad run, which is bad timing from that point of view. I mean, if those numbers drop, in theory, you could lose, up to, tens or £100,000, for example, on less people renewing their season tickets. So then it's almost like balances off, doesn't it? The paying up or reaching a settlement with the manager, if that's what you need to do, because you're losing the money that you're having on season tickets because of it, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit of a fine, balancing act, isn't it? But I do think ultimately he is safe, unless things get worse. I think Monday is a big game. I mean, he really does need to win that against Rotherham, I would say. I mean, I'm not saying that would hugely lift the pressure, but it would, it would help, wouldn't it? And certainly from, like I say, from an ownership point of view, I mean, you win that, we'd be closer to mathematical safety, and that would probably help keep his job, even though, if we're being honest about it, when the crowd turn like they did last night, very, very difficult to win them back. I mean, I remember when Kenny Jackett was here, probably wasn't a popular appointment necessarily. And then at the start of the following season, after he'd had 6 or 7 games at the end of the last one, it hadn't started great. We weren't playing great football. I think Martinez had been dropped. And the crowd were on his case, and he did well to turn that round, because, I don't think he was ever Mr. Popular from the start. But that's the only time I can really think of where a manager has been getting it off the crowd, and he has managed to turn the tide. I mean, usually it ends one way when this happens, and I do think the manager's days are numbered.
And Kenny Jackett had a team full of characters there, and full of passionate players. And I don't see it here. I really don't. I said to someone on Twitter last night, I said it's not going to be anger that kills this club, and indeed booing won't kill this club, but apathy will. People not turning up is going to wreck us. It's going to wreck us, because if we become a second-rate team again, a team that's is barely getting 10,000 down here, and perhaps even less than some of the more miserable midweek games, it's suddenly that's a big stadium for half a crowd. We watch Cardiff games on the TV sometimes when they're on, and you look at it and you go, those people there, those 3 people are sitting in that area. There's no one within 20 seats of them. They're just sitting on their own. It's like, it must be like watching a training game. It must be like watching, like they're not really in a league game, in a championship game, because they're so isolated from everyone with a small crowd. And you see it in some stadiums. You think, can't imagine that experience and how deflating that must be for everyone. You can't really get atmosphere going. You can't really get that kind of tribal kind of feeling going. When you go to the football, you want to really get behind the boys. You really want to kind of gee them up, and fans feed off each other. But apathy is a killer. And fans are just, they've been angry and they're showing their anger now. And other fans are saying, I'm just not going to bother. I'm just not going to go. And that is something you need to nip in the bud now. When you talk about Russell Martin's future, I mean, the fans are the ones that are there. And we've got a couple of representatives from the ownership, or the ownership representatives, if you like, in the likes of Julian Winter, who's down here, who talks up to Silverstein, Levy and Kaplan, etc., and the consortium. But when you consider how much they see, how much they're bothered by it, it's difficult to say. Are they looking at him, Russell Martin, and saying we're likely to be safe this season? Although game for game, I'm not sure which ones we're going to win. You'd have to think we'd win a couple of them, and that should be enough. You have to say what they're going to do. If they're thinking that they're going to get rid in the summer, then do it now, because any advantage you have to getting a manager in for 10 games of this season, you saw it happen. You mentioned Kenny Jackett, and you briefly mentioned Roberto Martinez there. Martinez replaced Jackett before the end of the season. Very nearly got us into the playoffs, actually, that season. And next season we won the league by 20-odd points. It just goes to show the difference it can make for a manager to be able to come in, assess the squad ahead of the summer window, see who he likes, what he doesn't like, try things, because any manager that was to come in now essentially would get a free hit at trying things out, seeing what works, what doesn't work, which players he likes. Give us a head start. Give us something to not go into the summer scrambling. But if they are going to keep him beyond the summer, then you'd have to wonder how much attention they're paying, because do they then give him till October, November next year? I'm really concerned that on a current trajectory, we will be circling the drain by this time next year. We could end up going down. This team is getting weaker, window on window, Steve.
Well, I think that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, we've already found out that Ryan Manning's gonna go, which isn't really a great shock, is it? I mean, I think Latibodiere will go. I mean, I don't think there'll be too many tears over that, but it's a number again, isn't it? I mean, Norton isn't involved at all. He's out of the contract, so you'd have thought he's nailed on as well. But then you look at, obviously, there's one or two loan players, isn't there, like Cundle. But then, let's be honest, we always need to sell, don't we? So, there's not that many assets left now. I mean, Perot will have a year left. Realistically, they're going to have to sell him, and I don't think we'd be too devastated at that based on what we're seeing. But at the same time, he has scored 12 goals. I mean, if you don't replace him and then there's no goals, then you're going to be in real trouble. So it is concerning. It just feels like every year we're getting worse. And, the owners are sort of sleepwalking this year, towards circling that drain, as you say. And I think that's what the problem is. And I mean, let's be honest, we have now conceded the joint most amount of goals in this division. So this defence is already more than capable of getting us relegated. So if we become worse going forward, then we're going to be in serious trouble. So, yeah, I think it is concerning. And I think that's what the apathy is, really, isn't it? I mean, there was anger at the start of this regime, anger towards the old board members who never forget their part in all of this. I think that needs to be said. And obviously the fact that this regime have made numerous mistakes, seems to be zero accountability. They don't seem that bothered because they're over in the States. But then when they do stick their nose in, they continually make it worse. They've, in truth, this ownership have got away with it to a point. Like, we stayed in the Prem after 1 year, didn't we? Then we went down, and then, they shafted Graham Potter, and it was lucky we had a lot of good young players coming through, so that got us out of jail. Steve Cooper did well to get us into 2 playoffs, obviously. So when you look at it like that, it doesn't look as bad, but now it is really starting to get worse. And I mean, when Cooper left, as we know, a lot of some of the higher earners had gone, and then a lot of his good loan players had gone back. So we're into a different, world now, where obviously the budget is a similar amount every year after the parachutes have gone, and it's starting to really show now, isn't it? That this regime is hurting us, and it's, like I say, on the pitch is where we're starting to really see it. I mean, even in terms of league table now, it doesn't look as bad as what we think, because we're 12th, but we could be 17th by the time that we play on Saturday. On Monday night against Rotherham. So I think it is starting to to show, and you get the feeling it's going now to continue to show. I mean, I think we've all probably mocked Cardiff this year, thinking they could go down, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if they do go down in the near future. They may not now this season, but I get the feeling we could be joining them as well, and that's what's concerning. And I mean, this club has, achieved a lot over the last 15 years or so. I mean, let's be honest, when me and you were young, for example, we were not a very good side. And I think my dad has always said to me that in his first 40 years watching the Swans, there were only 5 seasons out of the top, inside the top 2 divisions. And 2 of them were relegation seasons. So, it shows how much effort has been made to make this club successful. And you just get the feeling it's slowly and surely being undone. But people have passed the anger stage because they feel like they can't do anything about it. So what we're seeing now is apathy. People just a bit like, well, I don't really want to go down at the moment. And the fact is midweek games are never particularly appealing, are they, for most people? So that doesn't make it great. We're a bit unlucky with that, I think. But people are just generally fed up, I think. And, even I feel fed up to a point. I mean, last night Liverpool were playing Real Madrid on the TV. And I'd love to watch this, to be honest. I would never do it because I love the Swans and, you've got to be down there. But I can understand why other people maybe were not as, diehard as me, should we say, probably thinking, well, that's on the TV. Why would I want to go down there for? And that's what you're up against then. You've got to make it, we've got to do better. That's the truth. There are too many distractions in the modern world, aren't there? So, if things are not going great, people don't want to go down there. It's, and you could see that a lot of people last night, again, were just really frustrated, and it's only going to get worse is what we feel like. So something's got to change, isn't it? And unfortunately, I don't think things are going to change. They're certainly not going to change with the ownership. Manager-wise, I think they will make a change at some point. But like I say, I don't think they're going to do anything because, business-wise, it's not going to hurt us that much if we drop a few more players as long as you don't go down. And I think that ultimately is causing the apathy because people do want change, I think. And it's just not coming.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned earlier about this question that got a spiky response from Russell Martin in the post-match conference last night. And I think this is part of the problem in that it was one of the first times I've heard the press, put a question to Russell Martin that he really couldn't bat away with, with any real conviction. And he mentioned about the younger squad and stuff like that. But the question came in about the players not really believing in the process anymore. And he just said it was a very lazy assessment. And he pointed at the players. He said, I talk to the players. I see them every day. I know how much this means to them, how hurt they are every week and stuff. Well, I'd love us to see it, Russell. I'd love us to see it on the pitch. Because that second half, 2-1 down to strugglers Stoke, at home, we didn't look like scoring. We didn't put them under any real pressure. We win in a game. It's like the Alamo sometimes. You look at it and you're just like hanging on and trying to scrape the ball away and can't put 5 passes together. It didn't feel like that, and it was just a nothing event until they do a breakaway and yet another absolute howler from our the distinguished number 1 Andy Fisher. He's gone straight at him and he's managed to not keep it out. He's a horrifically bad run of form, but I've never seen him in a particularly good one, Steve. It's a nightmare. I'm sure he would like to end at some point because I'm not sure he's got what it takes to be a goalkeeper at this level. But that aside, the whole second half was poor. Russell Martin's response in the media is to push away any sort of criticism. And it's the lack of acknowledgement. It's the lack of addressing the key issues that is starting to get people's back up. And a lot of people are further along than even you and I on this thread, because I think sometimes you look at it and go, okay, so he's talking about, all he keeps going back to, bang, 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 go back to young squad, youngest division, blah, 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 proud of them, left everything on the pitch. Well, I'd argue about that one. But you see some things out there and you're thinking, I'm not seeing the hunger from this team. I'm not seeing the fight. I'm not seeing those players think, we're 2-1 down here to Stoke. We're gonna make sure that we we're gonna batter them second half. We didn't. And I feel like sometimes, if you're not going to see the manager react and make a point of saying the things the fans are seeing, because they're seeing it on the pitch. So you get a manager in a post-match conference talking about what we think is a completely different game. People are going to be like, how can I believe in this? Because if you take him out and said, well, simply put, that wasn't good enough. No, the furthest he went was saying we paid the price for a bad 20 minutes. I'd argue the other 70 weren't that great, Russell. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of fans are feeling the same way now. And so a little bit of humility about this situation and recognising that we need to get better and quickly. Because this argument, I think another comment he made, Steve, was about, I'm in this room now and you'd swear we're in a relegation battle, but we're 12th, aren't we? Yes, we had that run earlier in the season, 7 wins and 9, which was a great points per game record. I've seen that of the other games, what does that leave us? 26 games? I think our points per game record is 0.88. It's the worst in the division. Outside of that run that we had, and bear in mind we've only had 4 wins in 20, so this has been going on a long time, this poor run of form. That gap that we built, which made us think, we can get to the playoffs this season, and still there's some that say it, Steve. Now, everything below us, despite us winning 4 in 20, no one's caught us because we had that buffer. Now, that buffer's gone, and you absolutely call it, before we kick a ball again, we could be 17th. And all of a sudden, those naysayers who say, what are you on about? We'll be fine and stuff, and look at us, we're mid-table, what do you want? That's not a true reflection of our trajectory. There are teams below us that are winning games, and we're not. Or certainly the ones we're winning, we're scraping by once in a blue moon. And if we carry on in the current trend, this is only going to end up with us dropping down. Like I say, week 17th before we kick a ball on Monday, then that means that the 4 teams below us who are outside of the drop zone are within touching distance of us as well, within a game or two of catching us. There's still 13 left to go. Now, I'm not saying, Steve, that we'll get relegated this year. There's still a healthy gap between us and 22nd Huddersfield. It's 11 points as it stands. They do have a game in hand, and so that could be clawed back. But the form is the concern. And the fact that is, Russell Martin is steadfast in saying, what are you worried about? We're 12th. If he's not seeing the alarm signs here, we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, I think what I was going to pick up on from you there was like, these comments from managers sometimes about, how can I put it, not reading the room or coming out with things that people don't believe. I mean, I think it's harder for managers now really to bullshit us because, I think last night a bit different obviously because we are at home, but you've got to remember that it's not just the people at the game that are watching it anymore. So many people, like last night, Red Button or, if people's got a stream, you can watch those games. And I mean, Blackburn the other day, there would have only been about 500 there that would have seen it usually. But it's not like that anymore. The fact is, there's God knows how many people probably managing to find a link for it online. And the fact is then, if a manager says something that you don't agree with when you've watched the 90 minutes, you're going to be questioning it, aren't you? Whereas before, you'd have to go, well, that must be the case because that's what the manager's saying and I haven't seen the game. It's not like that anymore. So, I think managers really have got to be careful about trying to, wind people up with, giving out messages that people are just not going to swallow, basically. So that really doesn't help. And, Martin, with these comments, it's really not good. And people are annoyed, as I've said. So, yeah, I think that's something he really needs to bear in mind. You can't bullshit people anymore.
No, you can't. You can't. And the table, the same reporter is there, next week because we've got Rotherham, who are one of the teams below us, and they're currently 6 points off us. That could be down to 3. I don't think there's many people having seen our performances against, who was it? Birmingham, Blackpool, Stoke. We looked at the run of games, those 4, right? Birmingham, Blackpool, Stoke and Rotherham. And you're thinking, if we can't win the majority of those games, then it's not looking great because they are home games against 4 struggling teams who are on terrible runs of form, low on confidence, and their home ground has to be a fortress. It's very much not the case. The crowds are dwindling, the anger setting in, and it's becoming not really a happy hunting ground for us. So you have to consider that Rotherham could beat us on Monday, and that's a very real possibility. And so, having already dropped potentially, say middle of the road, say we drop to 15th, then people are going, right, we're 15th. Then Rotherham beat us, so they're only 3 points behind us. That same reporter may ask another question and say, what about now? What about the discontent after today's game? And no doubt, if we do lose, the boos and whatnot that you'll hear from the crowd, rightly or wrongly. But then you'd have to say, we're a young team, we're learning, and I'm really proud of them. And think, well, by the next time we play, we could be 18th, we could be 19th. No, people aren't buying it, Steve. And I think ultimately, you need to nip these things in the bud, and we need to see some honesty, because, I mean, I don't know. Do you think potentially he's on borrowed time? I mean, this record that's one he's on is a bit of an eye-watering one, isn't it? Because you look at it and you think not many managers would survive off 4 wins in 20, especially when you dig a little deeper and realise that 3 of them had to come against 10 men.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the most damning bit of all, really, isn't it? The fact that they've all been against 10 men. But, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, really, I don't think he's under pressure for right now. Like, I'd be very surprised if he was sacked before Monday's game. But, I mean, should he be under pressure? You bet he should be, because it's not good enough. But, they will, as I've said, treat it like a business, I'd have thought. So he's okay for now. We lose Monday, the pressure will be ramped up. Then I think it's Luton away after that. Middlesbrough at home. We're on a very good run. If we don't get a win in any of those 3, then the trigger could get pulled, I think. But, a lot can happen between now and then. I mean, you look at Cardiff are on the shocking run and they've somehow managed to dig out 2 wins back to back. Sometimes something like that can happen and your season does turn. I don't think that's coming right now, if I'm honest. But
they've got a new manager who's just about ready to stamp his authority there. You can see a rationale to why they've won a game. The confidence is up. They're starting to believe in what he's trying to do there, and they've backed that up with another win. And again, winning a game late on is a great confidence booster for them. So they could potentially go on a little mini run there and steer themselves away from immediate danger. But you can see with some of these teams, like Huddersfield picked up a win the other day, a hugely important one for them. They're very much still looking favourites to drop, but they've got a new manager, Neil Warnock, a master of survival in this league, by the way. So you look at it and you think, these clubs and these fans will have reasons to be optimistic. Swansea have seen the same thing for 18 months. Do they still feel the same way about their club?
Yeah, I think the other frustrating thing to look at it is, obviously, in Huddersfield and Cardiff both beat Birmingham, didn't they? A team that we know are crap. Yeah. And obviously we somehow ended up losing to. So that probably says it all as well, doesn't it? They've managed. I know everyone can beat each other at this level, but we've all played Birmingham in the last 2-3 weeks or whatever, and we're the one that has lost when we shouldn't have, and the other 2 have managed to beat them. So, that probably shows where we're at the moment. We can't beat poor sides. And if we can't beat poor sides, who are you going to beat, really? So it is concerning. I mean, the gap is, it's more than big enough, isn't it, for it to be okay. But, I mean, we're 11 points off it now, but we're going to be closer to it by the season end, I'd have thought, the way we're going, aren't we?
I think another thing is, so we're just hoping the games run out before the points run out, which is a bit sad, really. But one of the other things I've seen a few times last night was that no one's going to do a better job than Russell Martin. No one can take this team any further than Russell Martin has. I get that he's been dealt a shit hand, right? And I keep hearing that this is Russell Martin's team, so how you can expect anyone else to do more than Russell Martin's doing with it? I'd argue on that, because this is a team that is, by its very definition of the Russell Martin team, should be able to play with the sort of confidence, the sort of swagger that his teams need to play with to make it successful. Our team is shit scared of their own shadows at the moment. Every week you see them shaking, quaking in their boots and not being able to string 3 points. And I'm mainly focusing on the defence here when I talk about this, because the other end is not so problematic for us. We are creating chances and we are scoring goals, but whether there's enough there in terms of it's not enough to counteract the problems we've got at the other end of the pitch. So to say that Russell Martin is the best possible man to get this team out of its current slump, I take a bit of issue with, because I think, personally, Wood and Cabango in particular would prefer maybe 4 at the back. Maybe a manager will concentrate a little bit more on defending. I was talking to one of my mates earlier, and he brought up a point of saying that Russell Martin says he doesn't focus on the opposition. He just focuses on what we've got to do, and that's telling, because we're not doing the basics. We're not watching out for the danger men. We're switching off, and we're just making sure that we're almost playing as if we're always going to be on the ball. So if we have 85% possession, that's all we're considering. But the 15% that we don't have possession, you mentioned it way earlier on the podcast, Steve, opposition seem to score from their first chance. And quite often, it's a chance we've gifted them. And almost every time, it's a gilt-edged chance. It's never a speculative effort from 35 yards. Or very, very rarely is it. And it's always something that we've just kind of switched off from, and they've just walked into an absolute chasm of space in the middle of the pitch, and we've not addressed it. And, I'd argue that some of our players would much prefer to play in a flat back 4, have wide players, so that we didn't have to have Manning and Latibodiere or Sorinola gallivanting the other half of the pitch, leaving us wide open at the back, and just be defenders. I don't necessarily need Cabango to be spraying passes around like he's bloody, a Barcelona player in his prime or anything like that. You just need him to be able to deal with the issue first and foremost, and then get the ball to the likes of Grimes and stuff, who are much more competent on the ball, and that is really their bread and butter. But our defenders are being asked to do things they're uncomfortable with. So how can you then say that this is a Russell Martin team? Because the very players that are in this Russell Martin team aren't good enough to be in a Russell Martin team. So I don't know. I take issue with the fact that Russell Martin is the only man who could possibly get a tune out of this lot. Because I think someone who came in and just did the basics, I'm not advocating this, by the way, but I say if someone came in and just did the basics, i.e., we're not going to start conceding so many goals from bloody corners. We're going to make sure we're physical, and we're going to make sure we're aggressive, and we're going to fight for those loose balls, and just did the basics with that, I think our league position would show an improvement overnight. Now, that wouldn't be the Swansea way, but it certainly would be an improvement on what Russell Martin's getting out to them. So, I don't know, I just disagree with the fact that Russell Martin's the only possible man to get us out of this current slump. I don't see it.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, how many other managers out there could, ensure that we tightened up a bit at the back? Probably a lot of them, I'd have thought, because this is as bad as I've ever seen from the Swans team in, 25 plus years going down there. So, certainly, well, defensively anyway, obviously we've seen far worse than this, but I don't know if we've ever given away goals as bad as we do. Certainly the number of goals that are just so poor. I mean, it is basic, and as I mentioned earlier about, you see that minute new, I think you do with. I think we are talking that level. So, there's definitely people out there that could do a better job. I can't let that wash, I'm afraid. Not buying it at all. Who these people are is far more debatable. But I mean, but people will always take jobs. I mean, I was having a conversation with someone earlier, and I said, look, at the end of the day, someone had to give Michael Carrick a chance. I know it's going far better than you'd ever expected. But I mean, if he was offered our job, I think if he was out of work before he took the Middlesbrough job, possibly may have taken him. I mean, you've got Kieran McKenna, the Ipswich manager. He's similar. I think he would have taken it previously if he didn't have work. So Duncan Ferguson has gone to Forest Green, look. I mean, if he was offered our job, he would have taken it. So, and again, I'm not saying any of these would have necessarily done brilliantly down here, but you'll always attract people because it is a reasonable job. It's in the second tier of English football. Like I said, Duncan Ferguson has had to drop to the bottom of League One to get a job. So people will always be interested in it. But who the right person would be for it is, far more debatable. But the argument that people won't be interested or you won't get anyone decent, I don't buy that at all. You will always get reasonable people. You might not get exactly the ones that you want, but you do your research. I mean, the fact is, when most of the people that were appointed during our successful times, most of them were people that didn't necessarily want, or ones that we didn't know huge amounts about before. But we seem to have a good idea of who would suit us best at the time. So, it's nonsense for me. There definitely are people out there. It's just finding them wouldn't be easy, but you can find them if you look hard enough.
And you go, who are we gonna have to take over? But it's not necessarily about coming up with a short list of 5 managers or 5 household names for fans to ponder over. Because as you say, when we did our best, we were picking managers that no one else may have necessarily looked at. Brendan Rodgers was on the scrap heap after his Reading and Watford jobs, and we gave him a chance and ended up being one of the most successful managers in our history. We gave Gary Monk his first job after playing, and he ends up getting us our highest league finish in the Premier League. Martinez, again, hugely successful here. First job. These are not. I know 2 of them were ex-players, and so there was that link to the club already. But it was never necessarily going, let's go for a tried and tested. Let's go for someone, necessarily like, bringing in a Tony Mowbray or Steve Bruce or someone who's just done the rounds and done a lot of the clubs in these leagues and stuff. It was always about just looking outside the box and finding someone who matched our philosophy and our vision, as opposed to what they'd achieved at this level previously or what their name was and stuff like that. And people are getting so caught up in that side of it. We just need the right people deciding who the next manager's going to be. And who it is at the end of that then is we just trust the people who are making that decision. And ironically, the same people who are saying, "Oh, you wouldn't trust this lot to pick a manager." Well, you trusted them to pick Russell Martin. You're telling us now we can't sack Russell Martin because he's the best bloody thing that's going to happen to this club. But these are the guys that picked him. So I'm not defending them at all by any stretch. But you can't be a hypocrite about it. If they were able to identify Russell Martin and then get him in for an interview, I know he wasn't first choice, second or third, but it was an identification process where he was shortlisted and he was convinced to come down here, then that is the same approach that we'll make the next time. And I'm not saying it'll be successful, but the same people who are saying you can't get rid of Russell Martin, you wouldn't replace him, right? They got him. And I'm just, as you say, there's more managers out there than there are jobs. And we are in the second tier currently. So I can't see how we are, by any stretch, an appealing job. I mean, there's very big issues at the club. We can't, hide away from it. The ownership and stuff. They keep talking about, improving their approach to transfer windows and stuff and their communication lines and things. We're yet to see it and we're yet to believe it. But this is still a very attractive club with fantastic training facilities, a great youth setup, and everything's in place to be successful. We just have a financial hole that is causing us massive grief, and and an ownership team that don't understand how football works. I mean, that is something we are dealing with year in, year out. But managers will look at the bigger picture of all of what we got here. I want to ask you a question about Russell Martin in all this, Steve. Is there a chance that he'll look at it and say, I'm telling the media we're 12, stop worrying, whatever, but he's not stupid and he sees what's happening. He sees he can't affect or change or improve on what's happening. Is there a chance that if there was a sit-down meeting and an emergency chat that he would accept a mutual termination of his contract? Do you think that's a possibility?
You never know. I mean, it's very rare that anyone would just resign these days, isn't it? Because of the money involved. But I mean, you have to think that regardless of what he's saying to us, he may well think differently behind closed doors and feel that he can't say it. I mean, it would only be natural to have doubts, wouldn't it, when you're on a poor run and you're conceding so many goals. So, you do never know. I mean, I think, I'm not sure who said it, but the only thing that surprises them in football is the people are surprised. So you do never know. Look, it could happen, couldn't it? And sometimes these things do happen out of the blue as well. But I mean, I don't expect that to happen at this stage. But as I've said, I think if the next 3 games were to go badly, then you could see a situation where the manager is changed. But I think he's okay for now, just about.
Well, let's talk about them next 3 games. The next one in particular, Steve, as we talked about, live on TV, Rotherham at home. When this was announced, I thought it was absolutely dreadful. I still think it's an absolutely dreadful fixture that Sky would pick out. But there seems to be increasing amount potentially on it. There's a lot of jeopardy on it for both clubs. Rotherham in their scramble against relegation, us trying to avert such a thing, and with those question marks around the manager's future, or certainly from a fan's perspective, it does now look like it's going to be a huge game with massive implications.
Yeah, it does. Like I said, the crowd have turned, so another bad result. I mean, it'll get worse, won't it? And obviously, with it being on TV, that'll come into the wider public knowledge as well, I would have thought. So, yeah, it is a big game. As we said, we've had of the 3 home games, and this is the 3rd of them. I mean, they're quite convenient on paper, certainly. So we'd be looking to get good points from them. I know we did beat Blackpool, but as we've alluded to, weren't very impressed. And now we've lost last night. There's pressure on it, I think. And I mean, there will be trickier games to come. I mean, like I said, Luton away. They're in the top.
The next 3 games after that are against teams in the playoffs as we stand.
Yeah.
You've got Luton, Millwall, and Middlesbrough. They're 3 of the 4 teams that are currently sitting in the top 6. So, sometimes you can lose against the shit teams and beat the good ones, but those are teams that are really, really got something to play for, and you'd have to say
the other thing is when you can't defend
with better system.
Yeah, but when you can't defend, I mean, you just don't see where a clean sheet comes from. So if you're playing against anyone, a half-decent team, you're immediately thinking, well, you're going to have to get goals to, get a result. And that's the problem. It just puts a lot of pressure on you, doesn't it? So it really does feel like we do need to beat Rotherham, I would say, certainly from the manager's point of view. I mean, if we don't, then, yeah, there are trickier fixtures there. The bad run carries on and pressure could build, couldn't it? So, look, it is a big game, I think, now, especially for the manager.
It could be a huge game. We talk about how switched off the owners are. Julian Winter is a man who's been working in football for many years, and he will be acutely aware of the situation that's developing around him, even if the owners aren't necessarily listening right now. I was only almost half expecting there to be some rumour, some talk today about the future of Russell Martin. It hasn't happened. But we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And I'm sure we would be the last to hear about any action or possible discontent from across the Atlantic. So we'd be wondering, but Julian Winter will be looking at that and thinking, he's got to beat Rotherham, because otherwise there's no excuse for losing the games that we've lost recently against the teams that are struggling at the bottom, but there's plenty of excuse for losing to a high-flying Middlesbrough. There's plenty of excuse to losing to Millwall and Luton. But at the point of reaching those games, you can't then rely on, this was always going to be a tough game for us, because you lost the games that weren't supposed to be tough games for us. You say, if we're 17th for 4 balls kicked against Rotherham, we don't win that, and the next 3 are gimmies because the teams are flying high, we could end that run of 4 games, whatever, down in 20th, and then you're looking at maybe a 5-6 point gap between us and the bottom 3 with 8-9 games to go. Really, you're thinking then we need to pick up a few, and that is a very very negative ultimate scenario that we could be in. But I'm curious of your thoughts on the idea that the teams against the games against the top 6, he's not going to come in for as much criticism for, because they are against teams in the top 6. But this is the problem with not beating the strugglers.
Well, the thing is, that you do, to a point, you are always cut a bit more slack if you're playing better sides. But, when it's gone on for this long and we're conceding as many goals as we have, and then if you end up slipping down towards the relegation zone, it isn't going to wash, I don't think. So, But like I said, I do think that if that does happen, a scenario like that, and then we're realistically in trouble, they are going to sack him, I would have thought. So then you do have that. We'll see a change of some sort, won't we? Whether it's a caretaker or a permanent appointment, interim, whatever. But I don't think this ownership, as bad as they are, would allow us to slide towards League One without at least trying to do something about it. And that would have to be changing the manager. So look, we'll see how it goes the next few games. But Monday is a big game, very big game.
It's huge, and it is getting increasingly like a game that would have huge repercussions for both sides. Swan simply need to stop this rot, Steve. Who knows, maybe Rotherham will go down to 10 men and make it easier for us. But this is something which is a problem when I look at it. And we were chatting earlier on saying, look, what do we need? 2-3 wins perhaps to be safe. And I say, yeah, when you look at it, 13 games, you think, oh, you'll get them for sure. But then you look at it game by game and you think, Rotherham are going to come down here and they won their last game. They're going to be smelling blood. They're going to see an opportunity, look at our recent form and think, we can get at these, press hard, press high, pressure their defence. We can hurt these. And they're going to come here trying to upset the apple cart. And I think there's a possibility there that they could get something. The problem I've got is I don't see what Russell Martin, and he's alluded to nothing about what he's going to do to address the issues we've had, well, for the whole time he's been here. And how we're going to fix it, how we're going to fix our set-piece frailties, how we're going to fix our switching off at the back and us gifting opposition goals every game. And until he's going to address that, maybe not publicly, but certainly privately, then it's a worry to see where we go from here, because it's very clear how to play against Swansea City.
Yeah, look, I'm sure we will get the wins that we need. I mean, I can't say that with huge confidence at the moment, but things turn usually. I mean, to think that we won't get 2 wins in the last 13 or however many games, I do think it's unlikely. I think, I'm not saying it'll be convincing, but I'm sure that will happen. So I'm not overly concerned about the drop at this stage. As I've said, I am in the more long-term future. But look, I mean, the confidence is on the floor at the moment. Sometimes you just need a little bit of luck where, I don't know, there could be a tight game, even if you play someone and they miss chances and then you end up with like a dodgy goal or penalty, something like that. It can happen. So, I mean, and football is notoriously unpredictable, isn't it? I mean, I think it's unlikely we're going to keep many clean sheets, but look, I'm sure that, however we get there, we will, but, it just may not be convincing, and it'll be a case of we need to learn lessons that I'm not convinced we will learn. But look, we can worry about that another time, really, I suppose, and certainly looking to put that right in the future. But look, I'm sure, even though confidence is low, it's a long time to go through the rest of the season and think that we won't get the points that we need to stay up.
Yeah. Well, let's start on Monday. There'll be a great time to just loosen that noose and just give them a bit of a stay of execution here and really an opportunity to give us something to build on. And is it, I guess the question I would ask here is it important to put in a performance or a result?
Well, I think we just needed a result, don't we? I mean, I know we had that.
But Blackpool was a result.
And it didn't perk people up, but I think from the manager's point of view, he needs a result. Because it's ultimately, whatever we do in the crowd, I don't think it's like the old days where a reaction will get a manager fired. It isn't. No. And the owners are not watching. They're probably just going to focus on the result. So from his point of view, he needs a result. I mean, from a crowd point of view, he needs a performance and a result to try and win everybody back. But he needs a result. That's the thing. A result will keep him in the job, ultimately. Because, like I said, they will look at the bottom line, which is don't go down. So, a win will take us closer to that. And, yeah, it'll mean he carries on.
And will he get it?
I don't know. I can't say I'm overly convinced. I'm going to go with a prediction of 1-1.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. and maybe not actually thinking that we'll get a point out of it, but that'll be something, I suppose. So we'll say 1-1 then for the Rotherham game, and hope that we can take something from it to take into the next 3, because there's certainly no easy games coming up after that. Steve, any final thoughts before we wrap up this pod?
No, I don't think so. Can we at least go back? Can we just go back to having Saturday games at least? Because I think the fact that these games have been midweek have just made it even worse somehow.
It's a combination of all of it, isn't it? And the fact that we've had these shitty rearranged fixtures hasn't helped anyone, and compounded what has already been a difficult time for the team. If anyone is listening in any sort of corridor of power at Swansea City, I think, I'm not here to speak on behalf of the fans or anything like that, far from it, but I think the fans would really appreciate the sort of desire and intensity that we saw in those games at the start of the year, just to see us fight for those balls and make it that it looks like that we would, dive to block a shot and stuff like that. And that's all fans can really ask for. You can't force the result. Everyone wants to win every week, but you got to expect that players are going to not go through the motions and just, not challenge for aerial balls and shit out of 60-40s and stuff like that. Just give it a go. There's no excuse for lack of effort. There's no excuse for lack of intensity. Everyone can give 100%, can't they? Even, no matter what your quality is. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting end of the season, Steve. We're going to have plenty of podcasts between now and then. Hopefully, this is about as downbeat as it gets, because that'll mean that we've picked up. Certainly, the run of form couldn't get much worse than it has already. And as you said, if it carries on in this current trend, then we would see a change anyway. So, fingers crossed, we're all concerned that actually isn't what is needed, because that'll mean Swansea City have stopped the rot and started climbing the table. But that's down to Russell Martin and his coaching team. Let's hope that they've got some ideas, not just for Monday, but for the rest of the season, because the enjoyment of the game for us is all dependent on it, isn't it? But Steve, thanks so much again for doing this tonight. I'm going to have a drink now and think about everything we've just talked about for the last hour or so, because that is massively depressing, isn't it? But let's fingers crossed we'll have a better result this time round, and something to come back, be positive about.
Yeah, let's hope so. But let's wrap this up, because I want to try and think about something else now.
Fab. Okay, well, if you've stayed with us this long, thanks so much, and sorry for bringing you down. We'll try and make it better next time. Maybe we'll talk about something else other than Swans. That'll be better, won't it? For myself and Steve, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.